I've been running a Star Wars fantasy flight game. A few days ago, a joke has been going around about interspecies relationships. Today, I thought it would be funny to bring it back up and get the jokes rolling again because they were funny at the time. One player, and someone I considered my friend, then stated that he doesn't condone any relationship that doesn't procreate, or something like that. Still thinking we were just joking, I chimed in because I'm gay. I made a throat-clearing noise and stuff. He got serious, and he understands me, but I look past that because we're friends. Now that, that didn't vibe with me, but I didn't want to kill the game there, so I just stopped the joking and waited in silence while we waited for the last player to join the Discord. The game went on as usual. I cut it short because I had a headache. Normally, I'd push through, but dealing with the fact that I might just lose a friend and have a headache at the same time, it was hard. So I waited for an appropriate moment to call the game. I then had a talk with the rest of my players, and had a discussion that I will type up with a brief conversation. So hey, is what you said earlier how you truly feel about gay people? I am not for homosexuality for many reasons, yes. Alright, well, I don't agree with homophobia, and you no longer will have a place at my table. He has since been trying to convince me to reconsider, and I won't. At first, there was some questioning about my decision from one other player, but after talking it out, the game had continued until some things came up, and it's been on hiatus since then. Yeah, it sucks to lose a game, but at the same time, compatibility is really important in a lot of aspects of life, including playing Dungeons & Dragons with friends, and not approving of someone's existence is, well, it's awkward. It's kind of awkward, to say the least. This is a horror story primarily, but I'd also like to ask a question at the end. The story centers around a recent Dungeons & Dragons game that ended due to the events of the story. The players are amazing, I'm still friends with all of them. My main issue is the characters they chose to play and the inconsistencies of them. The party name was The Placeholders, a name meant to be temporary, but it stuck for the year this game lasted. The Placeholders consisted of 2 experienced players, Human Warlock and Satyr Bard. They were mostly spectators, as I believe they decided to give the new players the spotlight. The new players included a half-orc paladin, who started out very honorable, Harangon Ranger, who was described as a rabbit from Rango, and a dragonborn barbarian with the noble background, and a drow sorcerer, though he missed a lot of sessions. So we had 4 new players, but more specifically, the Ranger and Paladin were new to Dungeons & Dragons type fantasy. This resulted in them imagining the Elven Sorcerer as either a Keebler Elf or as Dobby, which is what they took to calling him. How have they never seen an elf before? Now, the Barbarian was a fun character, blatantly obnoxious in the way an 8-foot-tall dragon noble likely would be. So I felt although he was abrasive, I was fine with it, and my players were too. That being said, he did have a few issues. For one of the first combats, after knocking down a kobold thief, I asked him, please, paint a picture. How do you knock him down, or tie him up? What does it look like? Well, I want to cut his head off and slice him in half. In the middle of the main road? During the festival? I mean, yeah, why would that matter? So he does that, and they get arrested. Duh. Luckily for them, there was a bounty on the kobold's head. Unfortunately, they weren't registered adventurers, so, it was still illegal. Their punishment was cleaning pig pens and doing errands and jobs for free until the bounty was paid off. Luckily, they found the kobold's lair in an abandoned hospital. After a brief combat, they found a room obviously rigged with volatile explosive barrels, and the barbarian got bored and set off the explosives, almost cremating 2 of his allies and still damaging the rest heavily. Obviously, they all turned to him with, "What the hell" responses. His response to that? Why are you complaining? I'm a totem barbarian. I only took half damage. No, your rage ended after the combat because you weren't attacking anything. After that, he was just as upset as them. Now, obviously this sounds bad, but we've laughed about it since then. Something that genuinely got to me was his metagaming, though, and his belief that intimidation could magically make people follow his orders if he just rolled high enough. Now, his metagaming was intentional, as I early on explained what it was and why it was not allowed. However, after he found the stats for the Vorpal sword, he tried to subtly roleplay asking NPCs where he could find it. When the random blacksmith didn't know of this legendary weapon that probably doesn't even exist in my homebrew world, he got frustrated and said I was making his life hard on purpose, and that I should just tell him where it is, or he was going to Google it. I told him good luck with that, but pointed him to the best possible place to find something similar, which did satisfy him. His problem with intimidation, though, was incredibly frustrating. He started out trying to intimidate civilians, who rightfully would fear an 8-foot-tall dragon man. When he tried to intimidate a guard, however, the guard drew his weapon. The barbarian player was upset because he rolled a 19+ bonus. How could he have failed? I responded with, exactly, you have successfully intimidated the guard. Then why isn't he scared of me? He is scared of you. He's scared you might attack him, so he acted accordingly. Later in the campaign, the character did a 180 and claimed he was now a pacifist, although he considered intimidation in all combats to be well within the limits of pacifism. I have something to tell you. Oh! I will be converting my ways. No longer will I be a violent killer. I am embracing the ways of pacifism. Oh, that's what you want? Oh, thank God! It'll be so much easier for us to get quests when you're not killing all of the NPCs. Phew. I am looking forward to what opportunities await us in the future.
1 hour later.
Pacifism! During this time, it seemed like the gap in violence had to be filled. As such, Paladin and Sorcerer took up that role and murdered a traveling merchant for all his potions. The Paladin became an oath breaker and leaned into being a murder hobo too. Now, cutting ahead in time, their last session involved entering a Wild West town that had Warforged with programming issues. The players were warned to treat the Warforged carefully, as they may not be thinking straight. The entire town also watched over them like family. The party got some ground rules and went to find a blacksmith, whom the barbarian immediately tried to physically intimidate. The blacksmith responded with a pistol shot to the barbarian's gut and told him to leave his store, though the others were welcome to continue looking around. Not long after that, the senile Warforged pastor denied them entry to the church for reasons relating to the story, and when they tried to threaten him and break into the church, he fired a warning shot. Combat ensued, and he gave them another opportunity to stand down. They proceeded to kill him and were kicked out of the town. That was the only established town for hundreds of miles, as they were teleported to a faraway continent. They knew this, so the Warlock and Bard don't engage in combat and were allowed to stay, while the Paladin and Barbarian were told they could never come back. At this, I ended the campaign. It's clear half the party wanted to be good, and the other wanted to be evil. I've been in evil campaigns, and they were amazing, but I said I can't run the game for two opposing groups in this situation. The part that stuck with me since, and why I'm writing this post, is that one player said, "I thought it was a sandbox." It is. You can do anything you want. Then why are you punishing us for it? After the session, I wished I had the NPCs simply shoot 2 of them in the head and ask them to make new characters. It is very probable that's what the NPCs would have done and would have shown them that their actions have consequences, but what do you think? I think that these people are just not really familiar with what Dungeons & Dragons is, and also not really familiar with the concept of consequences in a sandbox game. A lot of people jump to this kind of game from something like Baldur's Gate 3, or even Skyrim, and these games do punish you for your actions, but a lot of people find ways to cheese or skirt these punishments, which isn't really how it works in a D&D game. Also, unlike with a video game, D&D is being run by a human being who is also trying to have a good time. And if you go around stepping all over their good time, it's gonna get really annoying. I don't think you should have had the NPCs kill their characters. Instead, you should have talked to the 2 of them and told them very straightforward, look, if you want to play like this, I'm sorry, but you're going to need to find another Dungeon Master and another group, because your style is not compatible with what we're trying to do here. Either they shape up, or they find someone that better matches them. Ruining the fun for everyone else around you is not a good move. Not the worst horror story, but just kind of a bummer. My DM does not have any kind of maps. Everything, I mean everything, is just a white void. Cavern, white void. Epic Undead Fortress, white void. I think the combats would be so much better if I could actually visualize what's going on, but right now, it's just getting kind of tiring. If only we had CzePeku. This video is sponsored by CzePeku, some of the best D&D cartographers on the entire market. Thousands of incredible maps, tons of animated maps that explode with personality, and some of the most dazzling options that you can find for any sort of TTRPG cartography service. I don't know about you guys, but I need immersive maps in my D&D games. Just playing on a white background is not going to do it for me. This is a site filled with tons of maps with literally hundreds of varieties, each one with distinct and unique variations for you to pick from. They've got almost everything covered, from a mundane crossroads in the forest to a gargantuan beholder lurking in the depths of the Underdark. You'd think something like this would cost a small fortune, but no such thing is required. At the $1 tier, you get the base variation for every single map they released and every single map they will release. And if you want even more, pledging at the $5 tier will get you access to every single variation, where you don't get hundreds of maps, you get thousands of them. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a bargain to me. If you want to check out the incredible content from CzePeku, then you can head down into the description down below where you can pledge to their Patreon to get access to their incredible library of TTRPG maps. Seriously, guys, I have been pledged to these people for years now, and I have not regretted a single cent of that money. They are absolutely worth it. I absolutely recommend. Thank you so much, CzePeku, for sponsoring this portion of today's video. As always, supporting our sponsors does support us. And without further ado, I am going to turn back into an animated rat so that we can get back to the video. Disclaimer, I'm not sure how well this fits here, considering I never actually started playing the game, but I think about the situation a lot, and it always pisses me off. When I was in my early 20s, I lived with 3 college friends and one random dude who was in his 50s and 60s. The old dude is the focal point of the story. Let's call him Dave. A little backstory on the nature of our relationship with Dave before we get to the meat of the issue. Dave was a homeless man before he stuck up a friendship with us. We all liked him, so we invited him to come live with us. This turned out to be a mistake. Dave spent a solid 90% of his time researching conspiracy theories on one of my roommate's computers. Dave was a QAnon before they became cool and took every opportunity to show me all of his current quote-unquote research. Dave was not charged any rent because Dave did not have a job. We asked him if he would do some light cleaning while we were at work instead of charging him rent. He was more than happy to do the dishes and vacuum once a week if we were to pay him an eighth of weed every week. None of us were stingy and always included him in our circle when we smoked, so we all thought it was weird, but okay, screw it. Yeah, we could do that. At one point, our clothes dryer stopped working and I had to go to work. I asked a neighbor if he'd be willing to give Dave a ride to the hardware store to get the part I needed to fix it while I was at work, and the neighbor said yes. When I asked Dave if he'd do this for me, I gave him $20 and told him he could keep the change. The part was only like $5 or $10. This dude told me, I don't run errands for people for less than $40. So I went to get the dang part myself and then told him since he wanted to be that way, he is welcome to dry his clothes on the clothesline outside from now on. Now, Dave really liked Dungeons & Dragons. He talked about it nonstop. It got to the point where me and my roommates got really excited to try out D&D. And Dave was a seasoned DM. He'd been playing since like the 80s. We all decided that Dave might be hinting that he wanted to play with us, and we were all down. So we asked him if he wanted to DM for a game, and he lit up like a kid on Christmas. A couple of weeks go by as we let him get prepared, and when the day finally comes to play, he drops this little bit of info on us. Since it's so much work to run a campaign, I've decided to charge you guys a small fee. Okay, yeah, I can see that. How much are we talking? Like a one-time payment of $100? No, I never run tables for anything less than $10 an hour per person, including the time it takes me to work on the campaign, not just the time we were playing it. Naturally, us as college kids said, yeah, screw that, and as a result, I never got the chance to play D&D until I was 32 years old, and just decided to run my own Pokemon-themed campaign for some work friends. I don't remember the straw that broke the camel's back that was Dave, but I ended up kicking him out about 4 months after the D&D incident. The last time I saw him before I moved to a different state, he was pulling his little red wagon across the street. I gave him a little head nod as I just drove past him. Oof, TLDR, freeloading roommate charges us an insane amount of money to run a game that about 70% of the reason we wanted to play in the first place was to make him happy. Man, the freeloading is a whole horror story on its own. House horror stories always give me the heebie-jeebies. It's part of the reason why the Final Fantasy house still rings true in my brain decades after its first appearance on the internet. I just really value my own home, and yeah, that's why I live alone. But anyway, yeah, these people are being very generous with Dave, or at least, outside looking in perspective. I don't actually know what's going on in that house, but let's just run off the assumption that they were being generous, and Dave was happy to take advantage of these people. Look, generosity is awesome. I think you should always strive to be generous, but just be careful because people can take advantage of that. And when that happens, the best thing you could do is get out quickly. And to say the least, $10 per person per hour, including the prep time, it's a bit much. Just a bit much in general. The game in question is Starfinder, basically Pathfinder, but in space! Albeit heavily homebrewed. Only 2 of the species are from the core rulebook in the setting. Humans and Ysoki? I'm not looking that up. Basically space rats. Also, the conclusion I've come to, it's pronounced Ysoki! Hey, I got it! Screw you guys. Not that matters for this, they're called something else. Anyway, I was one of the 2 who joined what was advertised as the GM's second session of this ongoing campaign, with 2 returning players. I joined the game having already had 2 less than stellar experiences with Starfinder, one where we were basically going module to module without much in the way of characters, and a play-by-post that I felt focused too much on my character early on, even as I tried to end particular set pieces so that other players could do their thing. All 3 games I was in did some things better than the other 2. In the case of this last game, the game master did not do much in the way of voice acting, but his dialogue was on point. And I joined the game because I was promised loot that would be unique to my character, as well as the character development I sorely missed in the first game. To his credit, the game master did indeed give my character, an aforementioned rat species, Technomancer, basically a magic user that interfaces with machines magically, he gave me a magic blaster. Nothing too crazy, but a good early game prize, and also took the time to hold a voice call where he hashed out some shady figures my character was forced to give protection money to before the events of this campaign, which is all good stuff. Then one of the other new players skipped town without much explanation, or if he did explain, the game master never shared the explanation with me, and the rest of us just continued. I was starting to notice that one of the 2 returning players, whom I will call Fox because her character is basically a space kitsune minus the shapeshifting, well, they got plenty of encounters with NPCs they'd met previously, which has occasionally directed the other returning player as well. I just brushed this off. After all, they were involved in the game longer than I was. I was a newcomer. Actually, since the other new player left at that point, I was the only newcomer. It was in this state of affairs that our group completed their first mission together in this new configuration, and we were about to return to the space station where we met when the other returning player seemed to distance himself from the group, and then left altogether. Undeterred, the game master found 2 replacement players and arranged for one of them to meet us at the spaceport before he left. The other player was a no-show due to scheduling and would meet us at the station later. That didn't quite pan out, as in the next session the other new player was able to play, but the first one didn't show up at all, and then both of them left without much explanation before what would be our next session. It was just me, Fox, and the GM left at that point. The game master was quite noticeably hurt by this turn of events. Us 2 remaining players decided to stick around, but the GM elected not to find replacement players this time around. I guess he figured, what's the point? They're just gonna leave anyway. We rewound a bit, do our first few missions on our way back to the station, saved some lives, kicked a bit of butt, felt good about it. Then, one game day came around when I just didn't feel like playing. There was inclement weather in my area, and I used that as an excuse not to play. I returned next week invigorated, never more ready to play, and I enjoyed myself like I usually did. And then this week happened. And in the hours leading up to the session start time, a bunch of realizations hit me at once. First, there was the nature of this particular homebrew campaign. The missions and stuff were fine, and like I said up top, the GM did great dialogue for his NPCs. The problem was that the actual characters were kind of bland to me. In particular, the species he had on offer were largely all same-ish. I got a handout on the options available to me, and most of them were just humanoids with this one distinguishing feature. Otherwise, they're basically described identically. And I mean identically. 3 of them had the exact entire sentences of their descriptions copy-pasted. I latched onto the renamed just blah blah blah, don't care, because they were the most different. That problem also tied into my second realization. There wasn't a lot of color to this world. It wasn't the space opera I'd expect from a Starfinder game, the one that I indeed got in my first 2 games. It was more along the lines of military fantasy, with our characters being part of a special forces unit. I wanted Mass Effect, but I got a sequel to Ender's Game. I'm sure that would make a good story, it's just not the one I wanted to tell or be a part of. But the third goes back to Fox getting reacquainted with all the familiar NPCs. While the GM and I did indeed discuss stuff from my own character's story, and that did get brought in, it was done with so little fanfare that I almost missed it. It wasn't until sessions later that I realized that these guys that were sort of menacing but ultimately let's go our own way, they were from the shady consortium that shook my character down for all that protection money. Those last 2 points are honestly where I'm most likely to be the a-hole, since I have no idea if writing it down here makes me seem whiny or entitled or not. I kept going in the hopes that the game's story would properly include my character's story, but honestly, I was almost afraid at that point that if it did come up again, I'd either miss it again, it would be done as unceremoniously as before, or both at the same time, and I wanted out. I agonized for over an hour over whether or not I should though, considering how the GM might feel if he lost yet another player he wasn't willing to replace. This could very well end the campaign, and I think I might have done that. What eventually made me decide to leave was remembering that my enjoyment matters too, and at this point, I felt like I was essentially holding myself hostage in the hopes that my character would start to be included into the story. So I sent the game master a message explaining why I was leaving, keeping the focus on Fox to myself, since again, I understood why this was happening, but essentially boiling the other 2 points into a few paragraphs of, this isn't the campaign I thought it was going to be. Trying to be as diplomatic as possible and reassuring the game master that it wasn't necessarily his fault I was leaving. This just wasn't the game for me, even if it took me a few months to realize it. After sending the message, I left the Discord server our games were being held on, and I immediately felt awful about it. Sure, I was starting to lose interest, but as far as I knew, Fox and the GM, they were still having fun, and now that I was gone, like I said, the game's more than likely dead. If it hasn't been elaborated on quite yet, I want to stress that neither the Game Master nor Fox were problematic. They were both pretty subdued, but engaged with the world in meaningful ways that I could only hope to keep up with. I even joked with Fox that it would be amazing if we ran into something you haven't met before. The GM was also rather pitiable, unable to keep nervous laughter contained. The fact that he was putting himself out there like this to run a game for strangers he'd never met told me that this was a story he really wanted to tell. And I feel even more ashamed that I basically fell out of love with it. So that's it. Sorry if the story was a bit rambly or not juicy enough to constitute a proper horror story, but I've heard any negative experience can count as one, so I might as well put this out there. So having said that, am I the a-hole? No, I mean, oh crap. Look, drumroll please. Not the a-hole! Look, I get where you're coming from, and the fact that you feel this much empathy for your dungeon master and the other player, that's really good. But you are not under some forced obligation to love a story if you don't love it. The reason why I try to add more minor horror stories like this is because they are what you're probably going to run into, and they're also valid. Yeah, you're right, this game master, this other player, they are not bad people by any means, but they're not compatible with you. You are not getting what you hope for out of this game. Now, I will say, there is the possibility the GM would have changed up the style if you had approached them with these critiques more early on, maybe using that as an opportunity to improve the game. However, just like it's not your obligation to love someone's game, it's also not your obligation to help them make it better. It's your free time. This isn't your job. Look, I would love to help GMs to improve if I see a flaw in their game, but sometimes I just want to walk in the other direction because it's not compatible with me and I want to use my free time for things I really, really love. Sometimes it's best for two groups of people to simply just walk in opposite directions and do their own thing, and I think we all need to be more okay with that. This was mine and everyone else in the party's first ever Dungeons & Dragons game, aside from our Dungeon Masters. We were in high school and played during our lunch and break, so we don't have the issue of transport or people having to go out of their way to host. Overall, it wasn't a bad setup and things started out fine. The key thing about this group is that I was the only female player. I couldn't convince any of my other female friends to join, but I didn't think this would be a problem as I'd always had roughly equal amount of male and female friends my entire life. I was already friends with 4 of the boys when we were setting up the group, so I honestly didn't put any thought behind this. So as me and these 4 friends, one of them being the DM, started setting the group up, 2 more boys asked if they could join. We'll call them John and Pat. I never really interacted with these 2 before, but the other boys knew them and said they were fine, so they became part of our party. This meant we were quite a big group, but our DM assured us he could handle it. So we all made our characters and began playing. I was playing a wood elven bard and had specifically made her lesbian, as I was exploring my sexuality at the time, and I thought this would be a good way to do it. I also thought it would be a safe space, as one of my friends in the party was an openly gay guy, and we talked about it a lot. This was all going fine until John decides that there should be a romantic arc between his player character and mine. I politely declined this, saying my character was only interested in women, so I wouldn't want that to happen. He took it well enough, but did not seem too pleased. Also, I should mention that John was a bit of a problem player, always trying to kill plot-relevant NPCs and ruin other people's emotional moments, etc. A couple weeks into playing the campaign, I got really sick and was unable to attend sessions because of it. I messaged the Dungeon Master to let him know of all this, and said that he could play my character while I wasn't there, because, you know, we're friends and he had access to my character sheet. One of the other boys was also a very detailed note taker, so it shouldn't be too hard for me to catch up after being off. However, John took this as an opportunity to start the romantic relationship between our 2 player characters that I had previously said no to. Despite my character sexuality being clearly laid out on my character sheet, my DM allowed this and it became a canon part of the campaign without me knowing about any of it. Hey everyone, I am back. Ready to have some more adventures. Sorry, I was gone for a couple weeks. So, what's been going on? Oh, hey honey, we're just planning out our first ever date. Honey? Date? Or you got me confused with someone else? Because there's a couple reasons why that does not make any sense. Nope. While you were gone, since you weren't around to reject me, I had our characters start a relationship. You're welcome. Okay, a couple questions. Number 1, why are we in a relationship after I've been gone for a couple of weeks? And number 2, and this cannot be exaggerated enough, why are we in a relationship after I've been gone for a couple of weeks? Well, my true love overcame your lesbianism, and also, like I said, you weren't here, so there's nothing in the way of our love blossoming into a beautiful relationship. Yeah, well, true love can't stop this. Well, I guess a natural one can. See? Told you. True love. Yeah, well. So, I came back after roughly 2 weeks to find all this out and was absolutely horrified. When I asked why no one told me, they all said that John told them he'd message me to check if it was alright, and apparently I said yes? That's called lying! Out of your ass! I really don't know what to do, as this was my only way of playing a game I'd grown to love, but I'd have to keep dealing with John, as if John left, Pat would leave too, and Pat had become really good friends with all of us, and no one was willing to sacrifice that. So I stayed in the campaign, and yeah, I know that was stupid, and tried to retcon it back so that relationship never happened. The best I could do was make it so the player characters had dated but broke up after a while before the start of the campaign, but that didn't stop John from making the occasional uncomfortable comment. The annoying thing was, it wasn't bad enough so that the others noticed, just the occasional thing here and there. I did eventually end up leaving, as I found a much nicer group outside of school with other female friends and queer players, but this was definitely not the introduction to the game I would have wanted. I don't want this post to come off like I think John was bad because he's male. My point is that if there had been other female players at the table, I'd probably feel more comfortable to point out the things he was doing. All the other boys in the campaign were lovely, if a little, you know, blind. And I've played with a bunch of other male players since then who have been really nice. I just want to make sure the tone of this was clear. Yeah, that last bit is really important, guys. No matter who you are, call out behavior at the game if it is bad. Don't just sit there and let it happen. There is nothing worse than feeling alone when something bad is happening and no one seems to notice because you think you're crazy. You think, oh man, am I the only one who thinks this is a problem? Is this actually normal? It's like you're gaslighting yourself. Come on, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. Take some of that party mentality and bring it over to real life. Now, the whole playing with her character while she's not there thing, this is actually a problem in a lot of games. Maybe not to this extent. Starting a whole romantic relationship arc is, yeah, taking it way too far. But even Critical Role had this problem in Campaign 1. Pike Trickfoot, played by Ashley Johnson, often could not come to the table. And so the party wanted to take her on adventures, but Matt had to put the brakes on that pretty quickly because he didn't want her to, like, die if Ashley wasn't present. You gotta be careful when playing absent characters. Obviously, this girl did give her permission, but her permission did not extend to a whole romantic arc. That should be obvious to most, but apparently it's not obvious to some. Alright, more relaxed episode today. I guess I'm feeling that generous. If you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Tabletop Tavern Tips series, where we talk about D&D advice for both DMs and players old and new. It's linked in the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down into the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. You can't force romance to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Hey, by the way, if you have your own horror stories and you want a chance to be featured in one of these videos, there's an email in the description. Send them down there to get that chance. But hey, even if you don't have any stories, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.